I didn't make a sound. My name is Claire Beaumont. And for most of my life, I was the daughter my family forgot to mention. Not because I was invisible. Not because I was quiet. But because, in a family where success meant a degree on the wall and a title after your name, I never fit the picture they wanted to show the world. My older brother's name is Daniel. He's a civil engineer. He works for a firm in downtown Toronto. Drives a Lexus. And every Christmas, my mother finds a way to work his salary into conversation before the appetizers are served. My younger sister's name is Sophie. She's a registered nurse at St. Michael's Hospital. My parents cry when they talk about her. Actual tears. The kind that come with a hand pressed to the chest and a slow, grateful shake of the head. Like they still can't believe they made something that good. And then, there's me. I did hair. That's how my father used to say it. When someone at church or a neighborhood barbecue asked about his children, he'd go through the list. Daniel, the engineer. Sophie, the nurse. And then, almost as an afterthought, almost the way you'd mention the weather. And Claire, she does hair. Not Claire owns a salon. Not Claire has been doing this since she was 17. And she's really built something. Just she does hair. Like it was something I did to pass the time. Like it was a phase that had quietly gone on too long. I want you to understand something before I go any further. I don't tell this story for sympathy. I tell it because I know I'm not the only one who has sat at a family table and felt like a guest in a house they grew up in. I tell it because someone out there is sitting with this exact feeling right now. And they need to know what I know. The quiet ones always have the last word. I grew up in Oakville, Ontario. In a house on a street where every lawn was cut to the same length, and every driveway had at least one car that cost more than my parents' first mortgage payment. My father was an accountant. My mother had been a legal secretary before she stopped working to raise us. And she carried that identity like a badge. She never quite put down. Education mattered in our house. Credentials mattered. What you could point to on paper. What you could explain to someone at a dinner party, that mattered more than almost anything else. I was never much for school. Not because I wasn't smart. I just couldn't sit still for the kind of learning that asked me to memorize and repeat. I wanted to make things. I wanted to use my hands. By the time I was 15, I was doing my friend's hair in our basement on a second-hand styling chair I bought with 3 months of babysitting money. By 17, I was charging for it. By the time my classmates were picking universities, I had a waiting list. I enrolled in an aesthetics and cosmetology program at a college in Mississauga instead of going to university. The night I told my parents, my mother set down her fork and didn't pick it up again for the rest of dinner. My father just nodded slowly. In the way he nodded, when he was deciding not to say what he was actually thinking, Daniel had already been accepted to Ryerson. Sophie was 2 years behind me and already talking about nursing school. I was the variable they hadn't planned for. I finished my program. I worked at 2 different salons in the city to build experience. And at 24, I signed a lease on a small space in a strip mall in Burlington. Nothing fancy. 2 styling chairs. A wash basin. A retail shelf. I stocked myself. I called it Beaumont & Co., which my mother thought was pretentious, and my father thought was a liability, without a proper business registration. Which, for the record, I had already done. The first year was hard. I won't pretend otherwise. There were months where I paid myself almost nothing and put everything back into the business. I had one part-time employee, a woman named Rosa, who had 20 years of experience, and who I could not believe said yes when I offered her a job. I ate a lot of meals that cost under $5, and I drove a 2009 Honda Civic with a heat system that only worked if you hit the dashboard a specific way. But I was building something. Slowly. Quietly. On my own terms. My family didn't ask much about it. At Sunday dinners, which I attended more out of habit than anything else, the conversation circled Daniel's latest project. Sophie's hospital rotations. My parents' plans for a trip to Portugal. When someone asked how the salon was going, the answer was usually met with a polite nod and a quick subject change. The way you'd respond if someone told you their houseplant was doing well. I told myself it didn't bother me. I was good at telling myself that. The first real break came about a year and a half in, when a woman named Patricia walked into my salon on a Tuesday afternoon without an appointment. She was in her mid-50s, impeccably dressed, and she said her regular stylist had just retired, and someone had recommended me. I didn't know who Patricia was at the time. I just knew she had the kind of hair that had been neglected for about 3 months, and the kind of posture that made you want to do your best work. I gave her 4 hours. I listened to what she wanted. I pushed back gently on 2 things that wouldn't have worked with her face shape. And when she looked in the mirror at the end, she was quiet for a moment before she said, "You actually listened." Patricia, I later found out, was the wife of a prominent real estate developer in the Burlington and Hamilton area. She had a social circle that overlapped with boards and galas and charity events. Within 3 months of that appointment, my books were full. Within 6 months, I had hired 2 more stylists and was looking at the unit next door. I didn't tell my family any of this in real time. I'm not sure why. Exactly. Maybe I'd learned to protect the things that mattered to me by keeping them quiet. Maybe I was afraid that if I said it out loud at a Sunday dinner, it would get minimized before it had a chance to become real. Maybe I just didn't want the approval anymore. I'd stopped needing it somewhere around the time I hired Rosa. What I didn't know was that while I was quietly doing all of this, my brother had been talking about me. Not in a good way. I found out through my cousin Alyssa, who told me one evening in a Tim Hortons parking lot, looking guilty and a little relieved to finally say it. Apparently, at a family gathering I hadn't attended, Daniel had told a story about me that included the phrase, "no real career path," and a joke about how at least someone in the family knew how to do a decent blowout. Everyone laughed. My mother didn't correct him. Alyssa said she'd been sitting with it for 2 weeks and couldn't hold it anymore. I drove home that night and sat in my car in the salon parking lot for a long time. I wasn't crying. I was doing something quieter than crying. I was recalibrating. Here's what I decided: I wasn't going to say anything. Not yet. I wasn't going to call Daniel and make it a thing. I wasn't going to bring it up at Sunday dinner. I was just going to keep going. Some people call that the high road. I think of it more as long game thinking. The wedding was in September. Daniel had been engaged to a woman named Catherine for about a year. She was lovely. Genuinely. And I want to be clear that none of what happened was about her. She had a career in urban planning. A warm laugh. And she was one of the few people in Daniel's orbit who always asked me real questions about the salon and waited for the actual answer. The wedding was held at a vineyard property outside of Niagara-on-the-Lake. About 90 guests. It was beautiful, in the way that things are beautiful when a lot of money and a lot of care have gone into the same room at the same time. My mother had been planning it alongside Catherine's mother for 8 months, and I knew, because Sophie told me, that the budget was substantial. I wore a dress I'd bought at a boutique in Bloor West Village. Dark green. Not navy blue. Fitted without being uncomfortable. I got there early and helped with setup because that's the kind of person I am. Regardless of how the previous year had gone. The ceremony was at 4 in the afternoon. Outdoor. Facing the vineyard. Daniel cried when he saw Catherine come down the aisle, which made me feel genuinely happy for him, in a way that sat separately from everything else I was feeling. The reception began at 6. Dinner was served at 7. The speeches started just before 8. My father went first. He talked about Daniel as a boy. About teaching him to skate on the rink in our backyard. About driving him to hockey at 5:30 in the morning without complaint. He talked about watching his son become a man he was proud of. He talked about Catherine and how she had made Daniel better. It was a good speech. It was the kind of speech that earns its applause. Then my father said I have 3 children. Daniel. The engineer. Sophie. My nurse. He paused. The way people pause when they're about to make a joke. And Claire. Who, well, she does hair. Polite laughter from maybe a third of the room. The other 2/3 were quiet. Or smiling uncertainly. Or looking at their wine. I was sitting at the family table. Alyssa was next to me. I felt her hand touch my forearm under the tablecloth. Quick and light. And then withdraw. I kept my face still. I took a sip of water. I looked at my father, and I smiled. Because I had decided months ago, maybe years ago, that I would not give this particular thing the reaction it was angling for. Sophie gave her speech next, which was warm and funny and gracious. Daniel's best man, a university friend named Trevor, told 2 stories that were mildly embarrassing and very endearing. Catherine's maid of honor made everyone cry, and then Daniel's MC announced that anyone who wanted to say a few words was welcome to come up before the dancing began. I hadn't planned on speaking. But Patricia was there. I should explain that. Patricia's husband had done some of the land development work on the property where the wedding was held. They'd been invited as guests of the venue's ownership group. And Catherine's family knew them socially. They were seated 2 tables over from us. Patricia had come over to say hello to me early in the evening. And my mother had been standing nearby and had looked very briefly, like she didn't know what to do with the warmth Patricia directed at me. When the open mic moment came, Patricia stood up. She said she wasn't family, but she hoped she could say a word or 2 about someone at the family table. She talked about walking into a small salon in Burlington 3 years ago, not knowing what she'd find. She talked about the experience of being genuinely listened to. Levin Faye. She talked about how that salon had grown. She said, Claire now has 3 locations across Halton region. She employs 14 people. She was nominated for the Burlington Chamber of Commerce Small Business Award last year. And she won it. I've watched her build something real. And I've watched her do it without making any noise about it. Because that's who she is. She raised her glass. To the Beaumont who built something beautiful. The room was quiet for a moment. Not the uncomfortable kind of quiet. The kind that comes after something lands. Then people raised their glasses. Most of the room, 90 people in a vineyard at golden hour. And the sound of that was something I will not forget. I looked at my father. His expression was a thing I don't have the right word for. It was not quite shame, and not quite pride, and not quite surprise. It was all 3 of those things sitting in the same face, at the same moment. My mother was looking at her hands. Daniel met my eyes from the head table. And I held his gaze for a moment, before I looked away. Not with anger. Just with steadiness. Just with the look of someone who has been waiting a long time for a room to go quiet. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Here's what happened in the weeks after the wedding. And I want to be honest about this, because I think the honest version matters more than the neat version. My father called me 3 days later. He said he was proud of me. He said he hadn't realized. I thanked him, and kept the conversation short. Because I'd spent a long time waiting for that call, and the actual arrival of it was smaller than I'd imagined. That's not a bad thing. That's just what happens when you stop building your life around a particular phone call. My mother was slower. She came into the salon, one of the new locations. The one in Oakville, which she'd driven past dozens of times without stopping about 6 weeks after the wedding. She sat in my chair and asked me to do her hair. She didn't apologize. Not with words. But she sat very still, and she let me work. And when she looked in the mirror at the end, she said, "You're good at this." And I said, "I know." And we left it there. Daniel texted me the morning after the wedding. He said, "I owe you an apology. I'll call you this week." He did call. It was awkward and genuine and imperfect. And I appreciated it more than a smooth conversation would have allowed. I don't want to tell you that everything was fixed after that night in Niagara-on-the-Lake. It wasn't. Families don't fix in a night. But something shifted. And shifts matter. What I want to tell you is this: for years I carried the weight of not being seen by the people who were supposed to know me best. I made the mistake. For a while. Of trying to earn that recognition. Of hoping that if I said the right thing at the right dinner, someone would finally adjust the way they saw me. That's a losing game. And if you're playing it right now, I want you to hear me when I say put it down. Build the thing anyway. Do the work anyway. Let the facts accumulate in the background, while the people who doubt you are talking about other things. And then one day, in a room where you didn't plan to be seen, someone who watched you build from the outside will stand up and say what you never said about yourself. That's not luck. That's the long game. I have 3 salons now. The Burlington location has been open for 4 years. I have 14 employees, most of whom I've watched grow in ways that remind me of myself at 21. Too capable and too unrecognized and too stubborn to stop. I pay myself a real salary. I drive a car with a functioning heat system. I'm looking at a 4th location in Hamilton. And sometimes, when I'm locking up the Oakville salon at the end of a long day, and I walk past the Chamber of Commerce award on the wall by the reception desk, I think about a dinner table in a house in Oakville, where a man once said she does hair and waited for the laughter. He wasn't wrong. Technically, I do hair. I just also happen to do a great deal more than that. And I didn't need to announce it. The room did it for me. If you've ever been the one at the table who got the afterthought introduction, the apologetic shrug, the joke at your expense, I want you to know that the silence that follows a room raising its glass for you is worth every quiet year it took to get there. Keep building. Don't make noise about it. Let the work speak when the moment comes. It will come.